In the dim twilight of St. Mary's Cathedral, nestled in the misty English countryside of 1933, the organ's mournful notes echoed through vaulted arches like a lament for the damned. Reginald Hawthorne, the esteemed choir organist, sat at his instrument, fingers dancing over keys with ethereal grace. The choir dispersed after evensong, leaving flickering candlelight to cast elongated shadows across the stone floor. A gasp pierced the silence. Hawthorne clutched his throat, convulsing as if seized by an invisible demon. He tumbled from the bench, sheet music scattering like autumn leaves. The verger found him lifeless, a chalice of communion wine overturned beside the pipes. "Poison," the doctor whispered. But who would slay a man of music in God's house? Chapter 1. The Shadow in the Nave. The year was 1933, and the English countryside, that verdant tapestry of rolling hills and ancient hedgerows, lay shrouded in the perpetual mist of late autumn. Eldridge, a sleepy village nestled in the shadow of the Cotswolds, seemed untouched by the clamor of the wider world. The Great Depression's gnawing anxieties, the distant rumble of political unrest in Berlin, the fading echoes of a war that had scarred a generation. Here, time moved as sluggishly as the River Wye, which wound its lazy course past the thatched cottages and weathered stone walls. At the heart of Eldridge stood St. Mary's Cathedral, a Gothic edifice raised in the 14th century, its spire piercing the heavens like a defiant finger aimed at the indifferent stars. The cathedral was more than a place of worship. It was the village's soul, a repository of secrets whispered in Latin and sung in soaring anthems. Its nave, with its vaulted arches ribbed like the skeleton of some primordial beast, had borne witness to coronations, confessions, and quiet desperations for centuries. On this particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon in a smear of bruised purple and ochre, the cathedral's interior glowed with the subdued luminescence of beeswax candles. Their flames danced in iron sconces, casting elongated shadows that chestnut had silvered at the temples, giving him the air of a Renaissance portrait come to life. Elegant, slightly melancholic, with eyes that held the depth of forgotten sonatas. Hawthorne's fingers, long and articulate, moved across the keys with the precision of a watchmaker assembling his finest creation. The organ, a magnificent beast installed in the Victorian era, responded to his touch with a thunderous timbre that filled the nave, its diapasons swelling like the breath of angels, its flutes whispering secrets of celestial choirs. Tonight's piece was Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, that brooding masterpiece which evoked the very essence of Gothic dread. Storm clouds gathering over a forsaken abbey, the inexorable march of fate. The choir, a modest ensemble of villagers and a few aspiring professionals from nearby Oxford, followed his lead with fervent devotion. Among them was Lydia Thorne, the soprano, whose voice cut through the polyphony like a silver blade, her notes laced with a passion that bordered on the profane. She stood in the front row, her posture impeccable, but her eyes, dark and luminous, frequently strayed upward to the loft, where Hawthorne reigned supreme. To her left was Victor Langdon, the young assistant organist, his boyish features twisted in concentration, though a flicker of resentment shadowed his gaze whenever Hawthorne improvised a flourish too elaborate for his taste. Reverend Elias Blackwood, the vicar, conducted from the chancel, his gaunt face illuminated by the altar candles, his black cassock absorbing the light like a void. And in the shadows of the south aisle, half hidden by a pillar, lingered Amelia Hawthorne, Reginald's wife, her presence as unobtrusive as a ghost. She was a woman of quiet beauty, her auburn hair pinned severely, her hands clasped before her as if in perpetual prayer or supplication. As the final cadence of the fugue resolved in a triumphant minor chord,
The congregation, sparse on this drizzly weeknight, sighed collectively, the sound mingling with the dying reverberations that lingered in the rafters. The choir dispersed with murmured blessings, their footsteps echoing softly as they filed toward the cloisters. Reverend Blackwood pronounced the
Communal worship. The congregation trickled out into the mist, umbrellas blooming like black fungi, leaving the cathedral to its solitude. The verger, old Mr. Wilkins, a stooped figure with a lantern jaw and a perpetual squint, busied himself extinguishing candles in the outer aisles, his movements deliberate and ritualistic. From the loft, the organ's voice resumed, softer now, an improvisation on a Gregorian chant, its melody weaving through the empty space like smoke. Hawthorne's head was bowed slightly, his shoulders relaxed for the first time that evening. Beside the console, on a small side table cluttered with sheet music and a half-empty decanter of communion wine, stood the chalice, a simple silver vessel, unadorned save for the engraved cross at its base. It was wine reserved from the Eucharist, a sip of which Hawthorne often took as a private toast to his muse. A harmless eccentricity, tolerated by the Reverend. He reached for it absent-mindedly, his left hand never faltering on the keys. The chalice was cool against his lips, the wine tart and sacramental, infused with a faint metallic tang of the vessel itself. He swallowed once, twice, then set it down with a soft clink that was swallowed by the organ's sustain. For a moment all was serenity. The rain's gentle tattoo on the roof, the distant toll of the hour bell marking 7 o'clock, the faint scent of damp stone rising from the crypt below. Then, imperceptibly at first, a shadow crossed Hawthorne's features. His fingers, so fluid a second before, stumbled on a trill, producing a discordant screech that jarred the harmony. He paused, frowning, attributing it perhaps to fatigue. The melody resumed, haltingly now, as if the music itself recoiled from some unseen impurity. It began as a subtle warmth in his throat, spreading like ink in water. Unpleasant but not alarming. Hawthorne cleared his throat, a dry rasp that echoed faintly in the loft. He lifted the chalice again, peering into its depths, corners of his mouth tinged with pink, and his eyes, those once expressive orbs, rolled back, whites gleaming in the candlelight like twin moons in eclipse. The chalice toppled from the table, wine spilling in a dark rivulet that snaked across the floor, pooling at the edge of the loft like sacrificial blood. With a final gurgling sigh, Reginald Hawthorne slumped to the worn oak boards, his body curling fetally as if seeking refuge from the torment that had engulfed him. Silence descended, profound and absolute, broken only by the drip of rain and the distant lowing of cattle in the meadows beyond. It was Wilkins who found him, some 20 minutes later. The verger had completed his rounds and ascended the spiral staircase to the loft, as was his duty, to remind the organist to secure the instrument for the night. "Mr. Hawthorne, sir. Even song's long done, and the missis'll have supper waiting." His voice trailed off as the lantern's beam fell upon the scene. The sprawled form, the overturned chalice, the air heavy with the acrid scent of spilled wine, mingled with something sharper, more chemical, almond perhaps, or bitter almonds. Wilkins dropped his lantern with a clatter, the glass shattering and spilling oil that flickered perilously close to the sheet music. "Lord have mercy!" he cried, his voice cracking like brittle ice. He stumbled backward, fumbling for the rope that summoned the bell tower's alarm, but his hands trembled too violently. Instead, he bolted down the stairs, his boots pounding an erratic tattoo on the stone, emerging into the cloisters where he collapsed against a pillar, gasping for breath. Word of the tragedy spread through Eldridge with the speed of a brush fire in dry gorse. By 8 o'clock, the village constable, Sergeant Mills, a ruddy-faced man with a walrus mustache and a penchant for strong tea, had arrived, his bicycle skidding to a halt at the cathedral gates. He was followed by Dr. Elias Hargrove, the local physician, a bespectacled widower whose practice extended from infant fevers to the occasional outbreak of influenza. They ascended to the loft together, the doctor's face paling as he knelt beside the body, his stethoscope pressed. Influence extended to the churchwarden's meetings and the selection of the new choir robes. Who could harbor such malice against him? The Reverend, with his rumored financial woes? That ambitious pup, Langdon, chafing at his subordinate role? Or perhaps the whispers of Hawthorne's own indiscretions? Affairs with choristers, they said, or debts from a misspent youth in London. By 9 o'clock, the news had reached the drawing rooms of Eldridge's more affluent homes, carried on the tongues of maids and errand boys. In the snug parlour of Willow Cottage, on the outskirts of the village, Captain Arthur Hastings, retired military man, loyal companion to a certain Belgian detective, and recent transplant to the countryside for the sake of his nerves, paced before a crackling fire. His wife Dulcie, a sensible woman with a no-nonsense bob, looked up from her embroidery. Another catastrophe, Arthur. The village can't seem to go a month without drama. Hastings folded his newspaper with a snap. It's Hawthorne, the organist. Poisoned, they say. Right there in the cathedral, bold as brass. He glanced out the window, where the mist had thickened to fog, swallowing the garden gate. Dashed inconvenient. I was to meet Poirot tomorrow for luncheon. He's motoring down from London. But this will intrigue him, mark my words. As if summoned by the utterance of his name, the telephone jangled in the hall, a rarity in Eldridge, where most folk still relied on the post. Hastings answered, his face brightening. Poirot! Mon vieux, you've heard already. Oxford's involved, but it's local rot. Yes, come at once. The 8:15 from Paddington will have you here by midnight, if you hurry. Hercule Poirot, that inimitable detective, whose fame had spread from the salons of Mayfair to the pages of the illustrated press, was indeed en route. He had planned a quiet interlude in the Cotswolds, a respite from the ceaseless demands of his profession. But fate, as ever, had other designs. Seated in a first-class compartment of the Great Western Railway, Poirot sipped chicory coffee from a thermos, his orderly mind already adumbrating the puzzle. In his polished brogues, his egg-shaped head gleaming under the moonlight, his suit impeccable, despite the journey. Captain Hastings, it is good to see you, mon ami. And this tragedy. Tell me all, from the beginning. As they ascended the path, Poirot's keen eyes noted the details. Boot prints in the mud, a discarded cigarette butt near the vestry door. English, not Turkish. A faint smear on the window ledge that might be lipstick, or merely rust. Inside, the cathedral loomed vast and accusatory, the nave a cavern of flickering shadows from the few lanterns left burning. Sergeant Mills stood guard at the base of the spiral staircase, his helmet tucked under one arm. Evening, sir, or morning rather. You the Belgian gent? Inspectors do at dawn, but if you're keen. Poirot inclined his head graciously. Hercule Poirot, at your service. And I am always keen, Monsieur Sergeant, when injustice rears its ugly head. He began his ascent, the stairs creaking under his slight weight, Hastings puffing behind. At the loft, the scene awaited. Hawthorne's body, now stiffening in the chill, the chalice's stain a Rorschach blot of accusation. Poirot knelt, gloved hands hovering like a surgeon's, inhaling the air. Arsenic, yes? or cyanide. The almond scent is unmistakable. But look, Hastings, the chalice bears only his prints, n'est-ce pas? And yet, the wine was poured fresh this afternoon by the acolyte. Someone tampered after. Hastings shuddered. How can you be sure? It's all shadows and supposition. Poirot rose, dusting his knees. Supposition? No, mon cher. Observation. The sediment in the chalice. It settles unevenly, as if disturbed recently. And see, on the console, a smudge of powder, perhaps from a hasty glove. This is no accident, no suicide. It is murder most foul, deliberate, calculated. And in this holy place, mon Dieu, the sacrilege. As Mills summoned the doctor for a formal statement, Poirot paced the loft, his mind a hive of industry. The organ's keys gleamed mockingly, the pipes silent sentinels. He examined the sheep through the mist-shrouded elms that flanked the lane to St. Mary's Cathedral. The year was still 1933, but the night's grim harvest had aged the village by a decade, infusing its cobbled streets with a pall of suspicion that no morning sun could fully dispel. The air carried the crisp bite of impending frost, laced with the earthy perfume of wet leaves and the faint, acrid tang of chimney smoke from the thatched roofs, huddled against the chill. Birds, those indifferent choristers of nature, trilled tentatively from the yew trees in the churchyard, their songs a mocking counterpoint to the silence that had fallen upon the organ loft. Constable Mills had posted a solitary bobby at the lich gate, a young lad named Perkins, with a bicycle propped against the wall and a face flushed from the cold, his helmet perched like a crown of thorns. "No entry till the inspector's word, sir," he stammered to passers-by, though few ventured near. Eldridge preferred its scandal savoured in whispers over tea, not confronted in the harsh glare of daylight. Hercule Poirot arrived precisely at 8:30. His chauffeured motorcar, a sleek Daimler with curtains of dove-grey velvet, purring to a halt before the gates. He emerged with the punctilious grace of a man who viewed the world as a stage set for his performance, his Malacca cane tapping a rhythmic metronome against the gravel. At 5 feet 4 inches, Poirot cut a figure both diminutive and commanding. His patent leather shoes gleamed like obsidian, his trousers creased to razor sharpness, and his waistcoat, of finest cashmere, strained ever so slightly over the modest embonpoint that spoke of a fondness for patisserie. The imperial moustache, waxed to points of martial precision, quivered with anticipation, while his eyes, those twin emeralds of incisive intellect, swept the scene with the dispassionate gaze of a cartographer, charting unknown territories. Beside him alighted Captain Arthur Hastings, his frame taller and more angular, clad in a tweed shooting jacket that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and regret. Hastings's face, weathered by campaigns in Flanders, and the subtler battle winding path, boots crunching on frost-kissed gravel, the cathedral looming ahead like a crouching leviathan. Its facade, pockmarked by centuries of English weather, featured gargoyles leering from the corbels, grotesques frozen in eternal mockery, their stone tongues protruding as if to spit upon the proceedings below. The great oak doors, banded with iron forged in some long-forgotten smithy, stood ajar, exhaling a breath of incense and antiquity. Poirot pushed them open with a gloved hand, the hinges groaning a dirge that echoed through the nave. Inside, the cathedral was a realm transformed by tragedy. The morning light, slanting through the rose window in shafts of roseate and azure, illuminated motes of dust that swirled like spectral dancers. The pews, those serried ranks of polished oak, stood empty, save for the odd prayer book left askew, its pages riffled by an inquisitive breeze from the vestry. The air hung heavy, saturated with the residue of last night's horror, the metallic undernote of spilled wine, the cloying sweetness of beeswax extinguished too hastily, and beneath it all, a faint, chemical bitterness that clawed at the nostrils. Arsenic, Poirot surmised, or its insidious kin. High above, the organ loft brooded, its pipes glinting dully like the bars of a gilded cage. The spiral staircase, a helix of worn stone steps coiled around a central newel, ascended into shadow, promising revelations as treacherous as they were tantalizing. Sergeant Mills awaited them in the transept, his burly form silhouetted against the reredos, a notebook clutched in one ham-like fist. He was a man of the old school, ruddy-cheeked from pints at the Red Lion, his tunic straining at the buttons, his walrus mustache flecked with tobacco crumbs. "Mr. Poirot, Captain. Word travels fast. Heard you were in the district. Inspector Hargreaves from Oxford's en route, but he's bogged down in traffic. Meantime, the scene's preserved. Bodies in the morgue at the docks, but the loft's untouched." Mills's voice was a gravelly baritone, laced with the broad vowels of the Cotswolds, familiar enough to anticipate the victim's touch. Mills scratched his chin, dislodging a crumb. Could be either. Hawthorne was meticulous about the chalice, always rinsed it himself after services. But last night, well, evensong ran long, choir fussing over a new anthem, plenty of comings and goings. "Ah," Poirot interjected, halting abruptly to peer at a scuff mark on the flagstones below the stairs. "Comings and goings, the very pulse of opportunity. Tell me, then, of the suspects, for in every village like Eldridge, the cathedral is a microcosm, a stage upon which envy, avarice, and amour play their parts." Mills consulted his notebook, flipping pages with the solemnity of a ledger clerk. "Four stand out, sir, by virtue of proximity and motive, as the governor might say. First, Reverend Elias Blackwood, the vicar himself. Tall chap, mid-50s, face like a fasting friar. Word is, the church coffers are lighter than a curate's conscience. Embezzlement rumors, funds siphoned for personal needs. Hawthorne handled the music budget, might have sniffed it out. Blackwood swears they were thick as thieves, but Wilkins the verger overheard a row in the vestry last Tuesday, something about dishonoring the house of God. Poirot nodded, filing the detail away like a card in his mental index. Embezzlement, a sin of desperation often. And the Reverend, does he bear the mark of a man cornered? Eyes that dart, perhaps, or hands that tremble. Steady as a rock in the pulpit, Mills replied, but off it, sweats like a sinner at judgment. They ascended the staircase then, the treads creaking underfoot, the air growing cooler and more confined with each revolution. At the loft, Poirot resumed his examination. The console, with its ivory keys scarred by years of fervent play, the pedal board smeared with a faint residue of polish, the overturned chalice, now cordoned with chalk lines like a macabre still life. He donned fresh gloves, lifting a sheet of music gingerly. The same Bach fugue,
irreplaceable. His music lifted souls heavenward.
Poirot bowed slightly, his gaze probing.
Indeed, Monsieur le Reverend, and yet in the shadow of such loss, questions must be posed. You and Monsieur Hawthorne, confidants, you say. No discord over finances, perhaps? Blackwood's lips thinned, a flicker of something, guilt, defiance, crossing his features. Preposterous. We quarrelled as brothers might over trifles. The accounts are impeccable. Hawthorne knew that. He paused, his voice dropping to a confidential timbre. But if there is sin here, it lies not with me. Pray for discernment, monsieur. The devil walks these halls. As Blackwood departed, his footsteps echoing like tolling bells, Lydia Thorne entered, a vision of fragile intensity. She was in her late 20s, with raven hair coiled in a chignon that accentuated the porcelain pallor of her neck, and eyes, vast violet pools that brimmed with unshed tears. Her soprano's gown of modest bombazine clung to a figure honed by years of breath control and unrequited longing. "Oh, Mr. Poirot," she whispered, sinking into a chair with the grace of a wilting lily. "Reginald, he was my world. His music, it spoke to me in ways words never could." Her voice trembled, a vibrato of genuine grief laced with something sharper. Betrayal? Hastings, ever chivalrous, offered a handkerchief. "Miss Thorne, our condolences. But you were close to the deceased? Romantically, perhaps?" She dabbed her eyes, the gesture theatrical yet sincere. "He promised everything. A life beyond these stones, tours in London, perhaps Paris. But lately he grew distant, cold, as if a shadow had stolen his heart." A sob escaped her, raw and unfeigned. Who could do this to him? To us? Poirot leaned forward, his tone velvet over steel. "A shadow, mademoiselle? Or a rival in the light? Tell me of last evening. Your movements are clean of poison. I prefer my battles on the keys." He flexed his fingers demonstratively, the knuckles cracking like distant gunfire. Finally, Amelia Hawthorne glided in, a study in composed widowhood. In her early 40s, she possessed the understated elegance of faded aristocracy, auburn hair streaked with silver, pinned in a chignon of quiet defiance, a black bombazine dress that whispered with each step, and hands, slender and ringless now, that betrayed no tremor. Her eyes, hazel and watchful, held the depth of still waters, deceptive in their calm. "Gentlemen," she said softly, her voice a contralto of measured sorrow, "my husband was a good man, flawed as we all are. This atrocity shatters me." Poirot rose, offering the seat with a flourish. "Madame Hawthorne, your loss is profound. Yet one hears whispers from the war, perhaps, enemies carried over from the trenches." She inclined her head, a veil of reserve parting slightly. "Reginald served in signals on the Somme. Shell shock lingered, manifesting in silences. He spoke of betrayals, comrades who faltered. And yes, a modest inheritance comes to me now, the cottage, his savings. But money? It means nothing without him." Her gaze hardened fractionally. "Seek the shadows of his past, monsieur. That's where the venom festers." As Amelia withdrew, the vestry seemed to exhale, the air thicker with the press of motives half revealed. Poirot paced anew, his mind a vortex of interconnections. See Hastings? A tapestry of threads, greed in the reverend's purse, passion in the soprano's heart, rivalry in the assistant's fingers, legacy in the widow's eyes. But which knot tightens to strangle? Mills cleared his throat. "There's talk of a ghost, sir. Old Wilkins swears he saw a figure in white up in the loft, just before the end. Pale as mist, vanishing like smoke. Village folk are buzzing. St. Mary's has poltergeists aplenty, they say." Poirot dismissed it with a wave, though he faltered last night, the trenches swallowing his courage, lives lost for his fear. "Silence your tongue, or we all hang. Your brother in arms, T.M."
The Belgian detective's face was a mask of rapt absorption. Betrayal in the trenches. A secret buried deeper than these pipes. Whose Hastings? The Reverend's? Or another's ghost from the mud? As the noon bell tolled, vibrating through the stone, a chill wind stirred the nave below, as if the cathedral itself shuddered at the unearthed truth. Chapter 3. Whispers from the Past. The vicarage of St. Mary's Cathedral stood apart from the main edifice, a squat Tudor manor, half-timbered and ivy-cloaked, its mullioned windows peering out like wary eyes upon the encroaching fog. It was midday now, but the autumn light faltered against the thickening mist that rolled in from the Wye Valley, transforming the gardens into a spectral labyrinth of blurred hollyhocks and skeletal rose arbors. The year 1933 wore on indifferently, its economic woes a distant murmur in London. But here in Eldridge, the immediate shadow was that of death. Reginald Hawthorne's, a blight that seeped into the very mortar of the village. Smoke curled from the vicarage chimney, carrying the scent of smoldering apple wood, a futile ward against the chill that had settled in the bones of all who dwelled within. Hercule Poirot, ensconced in the study, a chamber of oak-paneled walls groaning under the weight of ecclesiastical tomes and faded sepia photographs, sat before a blaze that crackled with ominous insistence, as if the flames themselves whispered indictments. The bundle of letters lay splayed upon the leather-topped desk like the entrails of a sacrificial rite, their wax seals long cracked, their ink faded to the bruised purple of old bruises. Poirot, magnifying glass in hand, a lens of flawless bohemian crystal that magnified not just script, but the very texture of deceit, pored over them with the devotion of a medieval scholar deciphering a palimpsest. The air in the study was redolent of pipe tobacco. Hastings's, his frame, a testament to the lean rations of post-war austerity. Elias, as in Blackwood, the Reverend. By Jove, Poirot, if that's the case, desertion in the face of the enemy? Court-martial fodder, that. Hawthorne was signals officer, you say? Relaying orders, mending lines under fire, witness to the whole rotten affair. Oui, Poirot affirmed, setting the glass aside with a soft clink that echoed like a verdict. Hawthorne beheld the treachery with his own eyes, or so these missives imply. And now, 20 years on, that spectre returns to poison a chalice in God's own nave. Motives incarnate, Hastings. Blackmail, perhaps. Or vengeance deferred, ripening like a medlar until it bursts with acrid juice. He rose, compact and impeccable, adjusting his waistcoat with a fastidious tug. The fire spat an ember onto the hearthrug, which Hastings stamped out with his brogue. Summon them anew, mon ami. The suspects, we shall peel their alibis like onions, layer by tearful layer. The truth, it always emerges, stinging the eyes. The interviews commenced in the study's antechamber, a narrow space furnished with a scarred refectory table and chairs that creaked like confessions under duress. Reverend Elias Blackwood was first, summoned from his midday ablutions in the manse's distant wing. He entered with the measured tread of one who had paced 1,000 pulpits, his cassock whispering against the flags, a leather-bound Bible clutched like a talisman. At 60, Blackwood was a figure of austere grandeur, his frame gaunt as a Lenten fast, his scalp fringed with wire-thin hair the color of ash, his eyes, dark and unyielding, recessed in sockets shadowed by perpetual vigilance. The lines about his mouth spoke of sermons delivered in thunder, but today they trembled faintly, as if the words unspoken weighed heavier than any homily. "Mr. Poirot," he began, sinking into the chair with a rustle of wool, "I come not as a suspect, but as a shepherd bereft of a lamb. Reginald's passing, it rends the flock. Poirot inclined his
Link to the war, but to shame? Never. My hands are clean of blood. They anoint, they do not spill. His voice rose, resonant with the cadences of the chancel, yet cracked on the final syllable, like a bell flawed in the casting. Poirot noted the evasion, the prayerful clasp, the invocation of Providence as shield. Motive deepened. If Hawthorne had leveraged this wartime spectre for silence on the embezzlement, or more, the Reverend's sanctity might mask a soul adrift. As Blackwood withdrew, his footsteps fading into the fog-muffled corridor, Lydia Thorne was ushered in by the housekeeper, Mrs. Grimsby, a stout sentinel with a lace cap and a tongue sharper than a thuribal's edge. Lydia moved like a willow in zephyr, her bombazine gown of the previous day exchanged for a dove-grey wool that accentuated her fragility. Her face, pale as moonlight on alabaster, bore the ravages of a sleepless night. Violet shadows beneath eyes still swollen from tears, lips chapped from bitten restraint. She perched on the chair's edge, hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl's, though her gaze, flickering between Poirot and the letters, held the desperation of a cornered doe. "Mr. Poirot," she breathed, her soprano's timbre now a fragile flute. "Must we revisit this horror? Reginald. He haunts me, his final notes echoing in my dreams." The detective's voice softened, a velvet glove over the iron fist of inquiry. "Mademoiselle Thorne, dreams are the subconscious's confessional, unbidden truths. These documents speak of nightmares from the war. Betrayal, loss. Monsieur Hawthorne, he confided in you? Of the trenches, of comrades fallen not to bullets, but to fear." She paled further, if such were possible, her fingers twisting the lace at her cuff until threads frayed. He rarely spoke of it. "The mud swallowed more than men, Lydia," he'd say, his eyes distant, like a man
laugh, short, barking, as he claimed the chair, legs splayed in careless masculinity. "This inquisition grows tedious, Poirot. I've compositions to finish, recitals to prepare. Reginald's death is tragedy enough without dredging up ancient history." Poirot's mustache arched in mild reproof. "Monsieur Langdon, history is the soil from which tragedy sprouts. You were spared the war, too jeune, n'est-ce pas? Your rivalry with the deceased was of the musical realm alone? No echoes from these papers? No family ties to the fallen?" Victor's laugh redoubled, though it rang hollow, like a cracked cymbal. "War? Father's lot, not mine. He came back a hero, shell-shocked but singing psalms. My battles are with pedals and scores, not Boche. Hawthorne blocked me, true, his jealousy of fresh talent, his clinging to dusty repertoires. But poison? I'd compose his elegy, not end it." Yet as he spoke, his glance flicked again to the letters, lingering on the name Elias, a shadow crossing his features like a cloud over the sun. Poirot catalogued it, the nervous tick, the over-protestation. Rivalry pure, or tainted by paternal ghosts, a vendetta inherited? Amelia Hawthorne entered last, gliding with the poise of one who had long schooled sorrow to stillness. In her mid-40s, she embodied quiet fortitude. Her auburn tresses coiled severely, her morning weeds of jet bombazine absorbing the light, her hazel eyes steady as compass needles. She seated herself without invitation, spine erect,
hands resting open-palmed. A gesture of candor or calculated vulnerability? "Proceed, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her contralto even, laced with the clipped precision of minor gentry. Reginald's secrets were his to guard, but in death they serve justice. The detective leaned forward, his gaze a scalpel. "Madame, these missives suggest extortion, a regiment's shame wielded as a lash. Your husband spoke of it? Of blackmail from the shadows of 1917? She hesitated, a fractional pause that spoke volumes, her fingers tracing an invisible sigil on the table's.
Interrupted. Mills, red-faced and bellowing, burst into the study, brandishing a chamois pouch. "Stolen, sir! The silver crucifix from the high altar, gone since last night, pinched during the chaos. And get this, found it in young Langdon's quarters, tucked in his music case like a bloody encore." Victor, summoned back post-haste, protested with vehemence, his face blanching to putty. "Planted, I swear it! I haven't left the village, let alone the cathedral. Someone frames me, jealous of my talent, or desperate to muddy the waters." He paced, fists clenched, the paisley waistcoat straining. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, a crescent moon in the gathering gloom. "The thief is clever, monsieur, deploying relics as red herrings to hook the unwary. But the little gray cells? They discern the bait from the barb." He dismissed Victor with a nod, turning to the window where the fog pressed like a conspirator. Mills grumbled of Oxford's tardy inspector, but Poirot waved it aside. "The official wheels grind slowly. We dance to a swifter tempo." The afternoon waned into a crepuscular haze, the cathedral bells tolling vespers in muffled peals. Poirot and Hastings retired to the nave for contemplation, the detective's cane etching invisible runes on the stone. The organ loft loomed above, its silence accusatory, while whispers from the choir stalls spoke of Hawthorne's wartime valor, and silences. A man who knew too much, Hastings mused, and said too little. As dusk bled into the fog, Poirot proposed a constitutional in the graveyard, a circuit of yew-shaded tombs to clear the mental palate. The air without was sodden, cloying, the paths slick with leaf mulch that clung to their souls like guilt. Headstones leaned at drunken angles, mossy effigies of departed worthies, squires in ruffs, matrons in coifs, their epitaphs eroded to illegibility. Poirot paused at a weathered slab near the east wall, its inscription half obscured by lichen. "Captain Elias Blackwood, 5th Battalion, Royal Warwickshires, fallen in the performance of duty, July 1917. Greater love hath no man." The date matched the letter's crisis. The name, the phantom betrayal. Elongated shadows across the yew-shaded tombs, their headstones, eroded sentinels of forgotten grief, standing in silent judgment. The lich-gate, its timbers weathered to the patina of antiquity, creaked softly in the zephyr, as if exhaling the night's accumulated sorrows. Hercule Poirot, ever the early riser in pursuit of truth's elusive dawn, had ventured forth from the vicarage at first light, his compact form bundled in a cashmere ulster, Malacca cane in hand, like a diviner's rod. Captain Hastings, bleary-eyed and fortified by a hasty pot of Darjeeling, trailed in his wake, collar turned against the chill, his breath pluming in ragged clouds. "Confounded hour, Poirot," he grumbled, boots squelching on the dew-slick path. "One would think murderers kept bankers' hours, not these vampiric vigils." "Ah, mon ami," Poirot replied, his Belgian accent crisp as fresh baguette. "Murder respects no timetable but its own, often the witching when consciences slumber. But see, the grave yields its secrets more readily in the morning's mercy." They had returned to the marker that had ensnared their attention the previous eve. Captain Elias Blackwood, 5th Battalion, Royal Warwickshires, fallen in the performance of duty, July 1917. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13. The inscription, carved in florid Gothic script, bore the patina of 2 decades' exposure, lichen veiling the edges like a shroud's fringe, the date aligning perilously with the letter's damning epistle. Poirot knelt, gloved fingers tracing the chiseled letters, his emerald eyes narrowed against the low sun's glare. Fallen, yet the Reverend breathes. A pseudonym? A cenotaph for the living damned? Hastings peered over his shoulder, squinting. Brother, perhaps? Twins were common in those officer cadres, shared commissions, shared fates. But desertion, that's the hangman's knot, not a brother's badge. Précisément, Poirot murmured, rising with a fluid guttering low, its embers glowing like accusatory eyes. He sank into his wing chair, the leather sighing under his weight, and for a long moment stared into the hearth's dying light. The room, with its paneling scarred by claw marks of time and its shelves bowed under folios of patristic divinity, seemed to contract around them, the air thick with the scent of stale incense and unspoken sin. Elias, he began at last, his voice a hollow intone, stripped of pulpit thunder, was my twin, born but minutes after me, in a vicarage much like this, in Warwickshire. We shared cradle, classroom, commission. The war, it sundered us. I, the elder by fate's caprice, took orders as chaplain. He, the soldier, sought glory in the mud. But glory eluded him at Ypres. He faltered, deserted under fire, the wire uncut, the barrage unchecked. 12 souls perished in the breach he abandoned. To spare our family's name, I claimed his uniform, his dog tags, buried an empty casket here, inscribed with his virtues, not his vice. I live his atonement, monsieur. Holy orders as penance, a life of service to cloak the shame. Poirot absorbed this with a nod, his mustache quivering in contemplation. A noble lie, perhaps, born of fraternal love. But, Monsieur Hawthorne, he witnessed? The signals officer, relaying the chaos? Your brother's flight. It became leverage, n'est-ce pas? Silence purchased with church silver, or darker coin. Blackwood's gaze lifted, haunted as a crypt's vault. Reginald knew, spared us exposure for years, in exchange for discretion on my indiscretions. The accounts, yes, a shortfall here, a diversion there, to fund Elias's exile in Canada. But murder? I am no Cain. His hands trembled now, openly, the Bible slipping to his lap like a fallen standard. As they departed the vicarage, the sun cresting fully to burn off the fog in wisps of spectral vapor, Poirot decreed a canvass of the village, an ethnographic foray into Eldridge's collective memory. The old soldiers, Hastings, they are—
Hawthorne the puppeteer? Finch cackled, a wet, phlegmy bark. Puppets all, Captain. War makes monsters of us. Gratituded with a shilling, they pressed on, gleaning fragments, a chorister's tale of Hawthorne's pallor, deepening with each tithe from the Reverend, a postmistress's murmur of letters forwarded to a Canadian address, postmarked Eldridge. By noon, the investigation veered to Lydia Thorne's cottage, a thatched eyrie on the village fringe, its casements aglow with the detritus of a soprano's life. Vocal scores strewn like autumn leaves, a harpsichord silenced in the parlor. Lydia, attired in a wrapper of faded silk, admitted them with reluctance, her eyes puffy from tears or torment. Mr. Poirot, the village tongues wag like adders. They say I quarreled with him last night before— Her voice faltered, a quaver that might mask deeper discord. Poirot's gaze, gentle yet inexorable, pinned her. Mademoiselle, alibis are the scaffolding of innocence.
Witnesses place you near the cathedral post-evensong, arguing in the cloisters, voices raised like a tempest in teacups. You promised me the world, Reginald. Now you withdraw like a miser. Is this truth? She collapsed onto a settee, face crumpling as a spent rose. Yes. Gods, yes. He spurned me cruelly, said our liaison imperiled his post, his marriage. The past devours the present, Lydia. I stormed away, vowing silence. But not death. Tears traced rivulets down her cheeks, genuine in their salt. Yet Poirot noted the hitch in her breath, the rehearsal of a role too oft played, motive sharpened. Jealousy, now forged in the fire of rejection. A soprano's aria turned venomous recitative. The afternoon scrutiny turned to Victor Langdon, ensconced in the organ loft, his domain by default. Hawthorne's throne vacated like a deposed king's. Victor, fingers flying over the keys in a furious etude of Liszt, halted at their intrusion, sweat beading his brow despite the chill. Alibi, you say? Sheet music, time-stamped by Wilkins, rehearsed, amended but weeks ago. My favor, alone, the cottage, his modest portfolio. No bequests to charities, none to others. Her pause lingered, waited. Reginald feared reprisal from the war's ghosts or closer foes. They'll come for what I know, Amelia. But love? It bound us, flaws notwithstanding. Poirot sipped, the Darjeeling scalding his tongue, a reminder of haste's perils. And you, madame, untouched by these spectres? No hand in the chalice's curse? Her hazel eyes met his, unflinching. I am no Medea. Yet in the porcelain's reflection a shadow flickered, guilt or merely the room's gloaming. As vespers approached, the supernatural insinuated itself. Villagers clamored of spectral strains from the organ at midnight, a ghostly toccata, Hawthorne's vengeful reprise. Poirot, undeterred by such ectoplasmic chaff, ascended the loft post-haste, Hastings in tow, lantern casting jittery phantoms. The console yielded its ruse, a concealed pedal, rigged to bellows hidden in the swell box, triggered by a distant string from the crypt. Mechanical mummery, Poirot declared, twanging the wire with satisfaction. A red herring to hook the credulous, diverting from flesh and blood felony. Evidence accrued like interest on a usurer's loan. Sergeant Mills, rummaging the vicarage kitchen under Poirot's directive, unearthed a phial in the larder, arsenic crystals labeled for vermin, residue matching the chalice's dregs. Reverend's hand, sir, bought it last Michaelmas. Blackwood, confronted, blanched but held. Rats in the cellars, nothing more. Twilight deepened, the cathedral's bells tolling a somber curfew, when a rap at the vestry door heralded peril. A missive slipped beneath. Cease your burrowing, detective, or join the organist in eternal silence. The script, elegant yet erratic, danced before Poirot's lens, cursive flourishes, a telltale loop on the Y.
Chapter 5. The Poisoned Chalice. The vestry of St. Mary's Cathedral, that sanctum of whispered absolutions and furtive glances, had by twilight assumed the aspect of a confessional booth writ large, a chamber where shadows pooled in the corners like spilled ink, and the air, thick with the residue of sacramental beeswax and the faint, acrid bite of arsenic's phantom, pressed upon the lungs like an unspoken accusation. The year 1933, with its inexorable march toward winter's solstice, seemed to hasten the encroaching dusk, the leaded casements framing a sky bruised to indigo, streaked with the contrails of departing rooks. Hercule Poirot, ensconced at the refectory table, with the incriminating missive unfurled before him, adjusted his pince-nez, the lenses catching the flicker of a single taper that guttered in its sconce. The note, "Cease your burrowing, detective, or join the organist in eternal silence," lay splayed like a venomous serpent, its script a cascade of elegant loops and flourishes. The Y in your, curling with a flourish reminiscent of a soprano's trill. Captain Hastings, perched on a stool with the posture of a man awaiting the guillotine, peered over Poirot's shoulder, his pipe unlit and forgotten in his hand, the tobacco's aroma mingling with the room's cloistral must. "By thunder, Poirot!" Hastings muttered, his voice a gravelly undertone that scraped against the vaulted silence. "That hand, delicate, almost feminine. Lydia Thorne's, mark my words. The girl's a powder keg of passion. Spurned love turns to strychnine swift as a viper's strike." Poirot's mustache arched in contemplative dissent, his gloved finger tracing the ink's feathered edges. "Non, mon cher. Observe, the pressure on the downstrokes, firm, masculine, belying the cursive grace. A forgery, n'est-ce pas? Misdirection, like a conjurer's sleight with mirrors. The killer apes the obvious to veil the oblique." He folded the vellum with precision, tucking it into his waistcoat pocket, beside the bundle of wartime letters, their combined weight a talismanic burden. Outside, the wind moaned through the cloister like chaff on the wind. Monsieur Hawthorne, alone in his eyrie, pours the reserved wine, a sip to invoke the muse. The poison enters not in the decanter, but post-service, when eyes avert and hands are free. Hastings, donning a pair of borrowed gloves with awkward fumbles, mimed the act, lifting the vessel, tilting it to lips, the ruby hypotenuse catching the lantern's gleam. Subtle work, Poirot. A drop in the dregs, stirred by the organ's vibration. But access, who lingers thus, unseen? "The intimate," Poirot replied, his voice a velvet murmur laced with steel, one who knows the routine as one's own heartbeat. Chorister, assistant, wife, or shepherd of the flock. He paused, inhaling the loft's confined ether, nostrils flaring at a residual whiff. Almonds, bitter and accusatory. Arsenic, confirmed by the Oxford pathologist this morning. Slow burning, insidious, death deferred for dramatic flourish. The killer savors the spectacle. Descending into the nave, where the transept's arches soared like the ribs of some primordial leviathan, Poirot summoned the suspects anew, the bells tolling compline in distant, mournful peals. The questioning deepened, motives unfurling like petals of a nightshade bloom, each revelation a thorn to the flesh of innocence professed. Reverend Elias Blackwood arrived first, his cassock a sable shroud that absorbed the candlelight, his face a parchment mask etched with the ravages of confession's prelude. He had aged visibly since Dawn's confrontation. The lines about his mouth deepened to crevasses, his eyes recessed further into orbits shadowed by the twin burdens of fraternal perfidy and fiscal folly. "Monsieur Poirot," he intoned, seating himself on the chancel step with the weariness of one who had wrestled angels through the night. "Your recreations mock the sacred. The chalice, it is the cup of communion, not conspiracy." Poirot's gaze, emerald and unyielding, pinned him like a lepidopterist his specimen. "Yet conspiracy it harbors, Monsieur le Reverend. The embezzlement." Hawthorne audited the ledgers, n'est-ce pas? Chalice was unimpeachable, preparing the Eucharist himself. Motive now a hydra of greed and shame. Lydia Thorne swept in next, her wrapper exchanged for a gown of midnight velvet that clung like a second skin, her raven tresses unbound in a cascade that framed a face alabaster pale, eyes violet wells brimming with tempest. She perched on a pew's edge, fingers interlacing like bars of a cage, her soprano's breath shallow and ragged. Recreated? As if memory were a score to be replayed. Reginald's agony. It haunts the keys, the very air. A shiver traversed her, genuine in its quiver, yet laced with the histrionics of one whose life was perpetual performance. Poirot leaned forward, his tone a scalpel sheathed in silk. "Mademoiselle, hauntings of the heart are potent poisons. These letters, newly perused, reveal an affair not yours alone. Hawthorne's hand to another. My dearest E, the trenches fade, but your touch endures. Initials ambiguous. Your sister, perhaps? Eliza the contralto in Cheltenham?" Lydia gasped, a sound like a flute reed snapping, her hand flying to her throat as if to staunch a hemorrhage. Impossible! Eliza! She loathed him, called his music derivative dirges at last Yuletide. No, it cannot be. He swore fidelity, whispered sonnets in the moonlight of the rose arbor. If betrayal— Her voice trailed to a whisper, eyes glazing with the fury of Medea scorned. Motive crystallized. Jealousy, once romantic, now familial. A sibling shadow eclipsing her aria. The chalice a vessel for vengeful libation. Her access? As chorister, she lingered post-evensong, a ghost in the nave. Victor Langdon followed, striding from the side chapel where he had been composing. His paisley waistcoat askew, cuffs rolled to reveal forearms corded with youthful vigor. At 25, he exuded the brash confidence of one who viewed the world as his recital hall. Yet today his gray eyes darted like minnows in a stream. His laugh, a bark.
Access undeniable. As assistant, he tuned the organ pre-service, hands-free to tamper. Ambition, now suspect of lethal cadence. Amelia Hawthorne glided in last, a spectre in bombazine, her auburn coils pinned with widow's severity, hazel eyes steady as the needle of a lodestar. She seated herself with the poise of one who had long navigated tempests of the soul. Her hands, slender, unringed, folded in lap like a novitiate's. "Truth's chalice overflows, monsieur. Ask, and I shall pour." The detective's gaze softened fractionally, a rare concession to the fragility beneath her armor. "Madame, these wartime missives, E, the beloved, hidden by your husband to shield scandal. Not the Reverend's brother, but yours. Your sibling, the deserter, Elias Jr., fled to anonymity. Hawthorne guarded the letters, your secret, lest it tarnish the Hawthorne name." She inhaled sharply, a porcelain fracture in composure, her fingers blanching on the pew's oak. "My brother, yes. Elias the younger, enfeebled by gas, broke under Passchendaele's roar. Reginald witnessed, shielded him, burned manifests, forged reports. 'For you, my love,' he said, 'no stain on our hearth.' But the weight crushed him. Blackmail from others in the unit, echoes of that night. I begged him to confess, to unburden. Her whisper trailed, eyes veiling in remorse. Motive unveiled, protection turned to peril, access intimate. Wife pouring the decanter's prelude, a lover's kiss laced with death. Poirot's methodology unfolded then, a tapestry of logical filigree woven in the nave's gloaming. He paced the transept, cane etching invisible sigils, his voice rising in cadenced exposition. "Elimination, mes amis. Sherlock's sieve, refined by the grey cells. The killer knows poisons. Arsenic, domestic yet deadly, procured locally. Access. The chalice's sanctity, breached post-consecration, pre-voluntary. The secret. Wartime betrayal, leveraged for silence or spite. Reverend. Funds, then a celestial drumbeat, presaging the storm. The nave shuddering as rain lashed the roof in silver requiem. Lightning fractured the rose window, bathing the assembly in strobic revelation. Faces illuminated. Blackwood's pious mask, Lydia's tear-streaked porcelain, Victor's defiant scowl, Amelia's veiled reserve. Poirot gathered the threads anew, ascending once more to the loft where the tempest raged without, a counterpoint to the chaos within. Amid the pipes, those brazen pillars of polyphony, he probed a seam hitherto overlooked, a swell box's panel, yielding to a concealed spring. Within, nestled like a viper in its egg, lay a vial, crystal, stoppered, its label faded but legible. Arsenic trioxide, Eldridge Apothecary, dispensed to... The thunder crashed, drowning Poirot's exclamation, the vial glinting malevolently in the storm's strobe. The storm that had heralded the vial's discovery abated as swiftly as it had arisen, leaving the cathedral nave sodden and somber, its flagstones glistening like the scales of some leviathan roused from slumber. The year 1933, with its penchant for meteorological caprice, mirrored the capricious turns of human malice, rain lashing one moment, a pallid moon peeking through rent clouds the next. Eldridge, that insular hamlet cradled in the Cotswolds crook, slumbered uneasily under the deluge's aftermath, its thatched roofs dripping like weeping penitents, the River Wye swollen to a murmurous growl beyond the hedgerows. Within St. Mary's, the air hung heavy with the ozone tang of thunder's recrudescence, and the faint insidious almond of arsenic's ghost, the rose window's fractured light, casting prismatic shards across the transept, like the detritus of a shattered vow. Hercule Poirot, undaunted by the tempest's tantrum, cradled the vial in gloved palm, as if it were a Fabergé egg concealing perdition, its crystal facets winking malevolently in the lantern's sway. Captain Hastings, drenched to the collar despite his ulster, white deep as a plough furrow, saluted with sodden inefficiency. "Storms played hob with the wires, sir. Telegraphs down till morn. But the apothecary, old Mr. Quilliam, he's a night owl, brewing tinctures by candle. Shall I rouse him?" "Immediate, man," Poirot affirmed, his emerald eyes gleaming with the zeal of a bibliophile unearthing a first folio. The trio ventured forth into the night, the lich gate's timbers groaning in the wind's dying sigh, the graveyard's yews whispering conspiracies to the headstones. Eldridge's High Street, a ribbon of cobbles flanked by bow-fronted shops shuttered against the gloom, led them to Quilliam's Emporium, a bow-windowed apothecary of Jacobean provenance, its signboard a mortar and pestle gilded to tarnish. Within, the air was a miasma of camphor and calomel, shelves groaning under jars of leeches and laudanum, the counter a clutter of mortars scarred by Pessel's percussion. Mr. Quilliam, a septuagenarian sprite with mutton chops like whiskered sentinels, and spectacles perched on a nose aquiline as a falcon's, peered from behind a ledger bound in cracked morocco. "Gentlemen and sergeant, such an hour for elixirs. Arsenic, is it? Aye, the villain of the piece, purther the whispers." Poirot proffered the vial with a flourish, the detective's compact elegance a counterpoint to the apothecary's dishevelment. "Monsieur Quilliam, your pharmacopoeia is the artery of Eldridge's secrets. This vessel, its provenance, s'il vous plaît, and the ledger, entries for arsenic these past fortnight." Quilliam adjusted his spectacles, squinting at the label's vestigial script, then delved into the tome with fingers nimble as a card-sharp's. Pages rustled like autumn leaves in zephyr, revealing columns of crabbed copperplate. Blackwood E. Rat poison, 2 drams, October 5th. Langdon V. Ink solvent, 1 dram, October 12th. There, sirs, the reverend for vermin in the crypt. Plague of rodents, he swore. Young Mr. Langdon for his etchings. Artistic necessities, quoth he with a wink. No other night's vigils paced the sanctuary's ambulatory, his exposition a fugue of revelation. "Mesdames et messieurs,
The letters from the loft, now fully deciphered, bind the Reverend's fraternal phantom to Monsieur Hawthorne's regiment. July 1917, Ypres salient. Captain Elias Blackwood the Younger deserts the wire, barrage unchecked, a platoon massacred in the cratered clay. 12 souls to the mud, for one man's metal melted. Hawthorne, signals savant, witnesses all, relays the false all clear that seals the doom. His silence? Purchased not with guineas alone, but preferment. The organist's post here in Eldridge, a sinecure for the sentinel of shame. Blackwood rose, cassock billowing like a mainsail in squall. His face ashen as altar linen. Lies! Reginald was no extortionist. Our pact was honor's veil, not avarice's chain. The massacre. It haunts my vespers, a litany of the lost. I bought his quiet with the living Elias's exile, yes. But murder? My hands anoint. They do not assassinate. His voice thundered, then crumbled to contrition, eyes pleading as a suppliant's. Yet Poirot noted the ledger's corroboration. Blackwood's rat poison, ample for Chalice's draught. Lydia, prodded by the inexorable logic, fractured next under Poirot's gentle scalpel. The affair, it gnawed at me. This phantom rival. Reginald confessed in whispers, another claims my heart, Lydia. One from the war's wreckage. I imagined Eliza, my sister, her contralto mocking my soprano, stealing my score. But last night in delirium he named her, Amelia's maid, old Bessie, who tended him in Flanders, her touch a balm amid the barrage. She buried her face in hands, sobs racking her frame like a tempest-tossed frigate. Hastings interjected, ever the gallant. But Bessie decamped to Gloucester years agone, alibis ironclad. Brothers. Adultery in the war's interlude. Whilst Reginald lay gassed in a field station, I sought solace in a subaltern's arms, letters exchanged in fevered cipher. He discovered them post-armistice, burned them, save these remnants, guarded as my absolution. Your flaw is my fidelity, Amelia. No link to his death. Love's lapse, not lethal. Her voice, contralto steady, quavered on the final syllable, hazel eyes veiling remorse's glint. Motive diffused, scandal's spectre, yet intimate knowledge of habits, the voluntary sip, the chalice's right. Poirot's deduction wove the skein then, a logical arabesque amid the chancel's hush. The poison's timing, post-evensong, pre-voluntary, demands intimacy with Monsieur Hawthorne's ritual, the reserved sip, the solitude savored, one who knows the organ's pulse as one's own heartbeat. Atmospheric tension burgeoned, the cathedral's echoes amplifying whispers to thunder, rain pattering on lead roof, wind sighing through clerestory vents, the nave a cavern of susurrant suspicion. Suspects shifted, pews creaking like perjured oaths, the air electric with anticipation's frisson. A new clue materialized in the loft's re-examination, Poirot ascending once more as noon bells pealed a clarion call. Amid the pedal-board's detritus, discarded quills, a stub of candle, his boot nudged a glint. A cufflink, torn and tarnished, its gold engraving winking in the lancet's beam. V.L., initials etched in florid script, the clasp fractured as if wrenched in haste. Hastings exhaled a plume of pipe smoke, the aroma cloying in the confined airy. Victor Langdon, caught in the act, or framed like his alibi? Poirot pocketed the relic, his face a mask of Sphinxian enigma. A frame within a fugue, mon ami. Victor's, or the killer's counterfeit, to mislead the measure? The sun dipped toward vespers,
shadows lengthening like accusing fingers across the nave. The initials a cipher, yet to sing. Chapter 7. Entangled Alibis. The organ loft of St. Mary's Cathedral, that elevated sanctum of sonic soar.
Hastings, leaning against the balustrade with the forbearance of a man awaiting the noose's knot, puffed his pipe in rhythmic exhalations, the cherry glowing like a baleful eye. "Victor's right enough," he opined, smoke wreathing his head like a nimbus of doubt. "Caught in the act, tampering with the chalice, perhaps, and the link snaps free in his haste. The boy's ambition's his noose, Poirot." The Belgian detective, compact and impeccable amid the loft's disarray, turned the cufflink between thumb and forefinger, his emerald eyes narrowing to slits of scrutiny beneath the imperial arch of his mustache. "A noose, mon cher, or a lure, dangled by the true garrotter to ensnare the unwary. Observe, the fracture is clean, too pristine for frantic flight, sawn, perhaps, in premeditation. Victor's possession, oui, but provenance? A frame, artfully forged, to tighten the web around the assistant's neck." He pocketed the relic with a flourish, descending the spiral staircase in a measured cadence, his Malacca cane etching echoes that reverberated like the tolling of judgment. Sergeant Mills awaited below, his burly frame a bulwark against the nave's encroaching twilight, notebook clutched like a shield. "Brought 'em all back, sir. Suspects in the vestry, stewing like witch's brew. Oxford inspectors delayed again, floods on the A40. Your show, Monsieur Poirot." The vestry, that cloistered chamber of cassocks and chalices, had assumed the oppressive intimacy of a star chamber, its low beams pressing down like the weight of perjury, the air thick with the must of vellum and the sharper tang of nervous sweat. Candles guttered in iron holders, casting elongated shadows that danced across the suspects' faces. Reverend Elias Blackwood, enthroned in a carver chair with the rigidity of an inquisitor. Lydia Thorne, huddled on a settle, her violet eyes darting like trapped moths. Victor Langdon, pacing the confines with the caged ferocity of a panther, his paisley waistcoat askew. Amelia Hawthorne, seated with widowly poise, her bombazine absorbing the light like a void. Poirot entered with the punctilious grace of a maestro, a composer improvising on a false score. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, a crescent moon veiling the sun. "Stolen, monsieur. Convenient, n'est-ce pas? Yet the fracture whispers otherwise, deliberate divestment. Your alibi, sound in theory, but Wilkins, the verger, confirms only the prelude. The finale fades into silence. Where then the denouement?" Victor subsided, glowering, his alibi a melody unresolved. Blackwood stirred next, his gaunt frame unfolding like a scroll of lamentations, his voice resonant with the cadences of the chancel, yet undercut by a quaver of frailty. "At prayer, monsieur, in the oratory adjoining my study, from 7 till the hour's end. The rosary's beads my witness, each Ave a testament. No soul intrudes upon a shepherd's vigil. God alone attends." His hands, veined as marble tracery, clasped before him in habitual supplication. But Poirot discerned the evasion, the oratory's solitude, a hermitage for hidden machinations. "Ah, but witnesses, Reverend. They are the ballast of belief. The housekeeper, Mrs. Grimsby, passed the door at past. No murmur of prayer, only the scratch of a pen on parchment. Accounts, perhaps? Or a missive to Canada?" Blackwood paled, his obsidian eyes flickering like a candle in draught, the alibi teetering on the precipice of perfidy. Lydia's turn unfurled in a cascade of fragility, her soprano's timbre fracturing to a whisper as she rose, hands twisting the lace of her cuff like a rosary of regret. "Home, Mr. Poirot, my cottage on the fringe, alone with the harpsichord's solace. I played Scarlatti till the tears blurred the keys, then paced the parlour, replaying his spurn. No alibi but solitude's echo.
The village sleeps early. No neighbor to corroborate. Her violet gaze dropped, lashes veiling a tumult, grief genuine or grief's masquerade. Access unchallenged, her chorister's privilege lingering in the nave's penumbra. Hastings interjected, chivalric instinct overriding caution. A lady's word, Poirot, surely sufficient, though the 7 till 9, corroborated by their parlour clock and the butler's log. We spoke of Reginald's war tales, betrayals unspoken, silences that scarred. No malice in my leave-taking, only sorrow's pilgrimage. Her hands rested open in lap, palms upward, a gesture of candor, or calculated candor? The alibi gleamed, burnished by witnesses. Yet Poirot's grey cell's word, friend's fidelity, or fealty forged in shared secrecy? The detective paced then, his cane a metronome, marking the fugue of falsehoods, the vestry's confines amplifying his exposition to oracular timbre. Alibis entangle like briars, mes amis, pricking the flesh of presumption. Blackwood's prayer, solitary, suspect. Mademoiselle's solitude, unverified, vulnerable. Monsieur Langdon's rehearsal, partial, perforated. Madame's visit, polished, yet proximate to the path, but deeper, the secret's marrow. The embezzlement, Reverend, was no mere shortfall. It funded a trove from the trenches, wartime loot, pilfered from a supply cache amid the desertion's chaos. Gold sovereigns, bonds, secreted to salve the survivor's silence. Blackwood surged to his feet, cassock swirling like a tempest's cloak, his face contorted in a rictus of denial and despair. Loot? Blasphemy! Elias's flight left naught but shame, no spoils but souls bartered. The accounts? A pittance for his passage, nothing more. Yet his voice hollowed, eyes evading the candle's probe, the motive metastasizing. Greed gilded by guilt, the chalice a chalice of cupidity. Poirot delved into the letters anew, unfurling a creased vellum from the bundle, a map sketched in hasty graphite, coordinates etched amid the epistle's margin. Crypt aisle 3, slab E.B. The cache awaits the bold. See, Hastings? Not mere missives, but a mariner's chart to perdition. Hawthorne deciphered it, demanded his tithe from the trove. The organ's compartment, one false note, and the symphony sours. Blackwood's oratory, pen scratches, not paternosters. Lydia's harpsichord, silent to the postman. Victor's thunder, fading too soon. Amelia's ratafia, a lane's stroll from the Lichgate. Hastings refilled his pipe, tamping tobacco with a thumbnail scarred by Flanders wire. The cufflink's the linchpin, points to Victor, but you sent a frame. And that map, crypt delving at midnight, mad as a hatter, précisément. Madness invites madness. We descend at the witching hour. The cache may corroborate the killer's claim. The clock struck 8, its chimes muffled by fog rolling in from the Y, veiling the manse in cotton wool. Poirot rose, donning his ulster with ritualistic care, the pair venturing into the night, lanterns casting pools of amber defiance against the murk. The crypt entrance yawned from the cathedral's undercroft, a grille of wrought iron, padlocked against the profane, its bars cold as Charon's ore. Mills, roused by telegram, the wires mended, jangled keys with gruff reluctance. Ghoulish work, sir. Bones and bilge below. But for you. The lock yielded with a groan, the stairs spiraling into Stygian chill, the air below a sepulchral exhalation of dust and decay. Walls lined with niches where femurs and skulls grinned in eternal jest. Aisle 3, slab E.B., a ledger of ossified blackwood,
loomed, its mortar friable as aged resolve. Poirot's lantern probed, revealing a seam, a pry of the cane's ferrule, and the stone pivoted, exhaling the must of mildewed canvas. Within, a satchel, leather cracked, clasps rusted, brimming with sovereigns agleam, bonds yellowed as the letters themselves. "Jackpot," Hastings breathed, fingers hovering reverent. "Wartime windfall, enough to fund a fugitive's flight or a vicar's vice." Poirot nodded, gray cells a-whirl. "The embezzlement's root. Hawthorne's audit unearthed it, demanded share. The chalice silences the snoop." As they resurfaced, sealing the slab with loam of disturbed graves and the faint acrid whiff of terror's aftermath. Poirot's ulster flapped about his compact frame as he sprinted the gravel path, Malacca cane clutched like a rapier, his emerald eyes ablaze with the fervor of a paladin charging the fray. Hastings, taller and less nimble, lumbered in pursuit, his brogues sucking at the mud, breath rasping in ragged plumes. "Amelia! By Jove, Poirot, if the killers struck again—" The words trailed to a growl, unbidden images of Flanders wire and gas flickering in his mind's eye. The cottage door yawned ajar, a portal to pandemonium, the parlor within a tableau of domestic desecration. Antimacassars askew, the ratafia decanter toppled in a ruby stain that mimicked arterial flow across the turkey rug. Amelia Hawthorne lay sprawled before the hearth, her bombazine gown rucked about her limbs like a discarded pupa, auburn coils disheveled, face pallid as alabaster, save for a livid wheal blooming at her temple, a contusion wrought by blunt force, the skin split to a pearl of blood. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, erratic tides. Consciousness fled to realms kinder than this mortal coil. Beside her splayed hand, a vellum scrap fluttered in the draught from the casement, its script a hasty scrawl in India ink. Silence or death. The words danced in the candle's guttering, shadows cavorting like imps at a sabbat. Poirot knelt with the precision of a surgeon at vivisection, gloved fingers probing the widow's pulse, thready but tenacious, while Hastings bellowed for Sergeant Mills, his voice booming into the night like a field gun's report. "Constable, fetch Dr. Hargrove, concussion by the look, and seal the lane, no soul stirs till we've answers." Mills materialized from the fog like a ruddy apparition, lantern swinging, his walrus mustache beaded with dew. "On it, sir. Perkins is cycling like the devil. But the note, same hand as the last, or my name's not Mills." The detective lifted the missive with tweezers improvised from a hatpin. "Inhale in the crypt, the letters litany. They near the light. We gather them now, in the vestry, suspects, witnesses, the full orchestra. No more solos, the symphony demands its denouement." Hastings nodded, pipe clenched like a talisman, and Mills roused the village with peremptory knocks, the bell tower's clamor summoning the accused from their slumbers, like souls to judgment. The vestry, that vaulted vestige of medieval piety, had, by the witching hour, assumed the grandeur of a Renaissance salon des suspects, its rafters festooned with cobwebs like tattered bunting, the air thick with the reliquary scent of myrrh and moldering missals. Candles proliferated in a coronal of flame, their pools of wax mirroring the pallor of assembled faces. Reverend Blackwood, cassock hastily donned, his gaunt cheeks hollowed by vigil. Lydia Thorne, shawl wrapped and shivering, violet eyes wide as a fawn's in snare. Victor Langdon, disheveled in shirt-sleeves, his blonde locks tousled by hasty ablution. And now, though absent in flesh, Amelia's shadow loomed, her attack a spectral fifth presence. Hastings barred the door with a constable's vigilance, the room sealing like a sepulchre. while outside thunder grumbled anew. A celestial overture to the storm's reprise, rain pattering on the cloister tiles like impatient fingers. Poirot took the lectern's place, a prie-dieu upturned, his compact form radiating authority disproportionate to stature, mustache waxed to martial points, eyes scanning the tableau with the dispassion of a cartographer charting perdition's latitudes. "Mesdames et messieurs," he intoned, voice resonant as a diapason's swell. "The net constricts, as inexorable as the noose of Nemesis. Monsieur Hawthorne's chalice brimmed not with wine alone, but with the lees of long-buried infamies, wartime desertion, embezzled alms, pilfered patrimony from the crypt's cache. Tonight's outrage upon Madame Hawthorne? A desperate diminuendo to silence the widow who knew.
Supply train, bartered for your brother's birth. Confronted, he threatened exposure. The chalice quaffed your cup of quietus. Blackwood sank back, face crumpling, as a palimpsest erased, a groan escaping like steam from a cracked flue. The dice. They whispered salvation, monsieur, a hand to outrun the ghosts. Reginald knew, yes, demanded half the cash for his complicity. I repented, swore the tables forsaken, but the poison, sacrilege beyond redemption. His alibi frayed further, motive metastasized, avarice armored in atonement, access to the Eucharist unchallenged. Lydia's revelation followed, coaxed from her like a recitative from a reluctant diva, her shawl slipping to reveal shoulders bruised by night's chill or inner tumult. Theft! Mr. Poirot, you wound deeper than any blade. Reginald, he was my North Star, till the spurn dimmed it. But artifacts, the ciborium, the chalice's paten. Oui, mademoiselle. The silver vanished from the sacristy, pawned in Oxford for a soprano's stipend. Vocal tuition in Vienna, dreams. Deferred by Eldridge's yoke. Poirot produced a ledger facsimile, the pawnbroker's script damning. Hawthorne discovered the depredations. Your nimble fingers in the reliquary, post-rehearsal pilferage. He confronted you in the cloisters. Return the sacred, Lydia, or the reverend learns of your larceny. Motive. Not love's loss alone, but liberty's lash. Exposure would exile you from the choir, from the stage you craved. The chalice? A chorister's curse, laced in the lingering after-even song. She buried her face in hands, sobs racking her frame like a tempest's trill, violet eyes emergent, glistening with salt and shame. The silver, it sang of escape, a ticket to Salzburg's spires. He promised discretion, then withdrew. Your hands profane what mine consecrate. I raged, but poison? My voice slays, not slays life. Alibi ethereal, motive sharpened to a stiletto. Desperation's descant, opportunity in the knave's neglect. Victor's confession erupted in solitude, a stage for subterfuge. Amelia's truth, relayed by Hargrove's proxy, her murmurs in laudanum's haze, arrived via missive. The physician's script a coda to her concussion. Accidental? No, madam. Your narrative fractures under scrutiny. The war's adultery confessed, yes, but the brother's desertion? Your fabrication to veil a deeper debt. Hawthorne's shell shock masked your own. Morphine pilfered from the field station. Dependency deepened in domesticity. He weaned you, withheld the vials, rage in withdrawal, the chalice your reprisal. Accidental overdose, you claimed in delirium. Forgive me, Reggie. I meant only sleep, not the grave. The assembly gasped, thunder crashing without in corroborative crescendo, candles flickering as if exorcised, shadows leaping like furies unchained. Blackwood crossed himself, Lydia whimpered, Victor sneered incredulity. Poirot paced anew, the logical process a scalpel's incision. Eliminate the impossibles, mes amis. What remains?
however improbable, is truth. The poison's ingress, pre-service consecration, the chalice sealed by the acolyte, yet tampered in the sacristy's seclusion. Opportunity narrows, not choristers linger, not assistants tune, not widows decant, but the shepherd's sanctification. Reverend Blackwood, you alone handled the elements, infusing arsenic in the absolution's guise. Dramatic build-up burgeoned, storm's fury lashing the casements, rain a relentless requiem, the vestry a pressure cooker of peril and portent. Poirot's finger extended, unwavering as fate's filament, toward the vicar. The killer is... Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The vestry of St. Mary's Cathedral, that erstwhile haven of hushed homilies and sacramental solemnity, had by the stroke of midnight devolved into a cauldron of confrontation, its oaken rafters seeming to bow under the weight of revelations half unveiled and suspicions fully inflamed. The year 1933, with its unyielding grip on the Cotswolds' chill October.
Sergeant Mills, his burly frame a bulwark against the ingress of village gawkers, clutched his notebook as if it were a crucifix, his walrus mustache quivering in anticipatory tremor. "The killer is," Poirot intoned, his Belgian accent curling around the vowels like a serpent, coiling for the strike, the words hanging in the musty ether like the toll of a leper's bell. The assembly leaned forward en masse, Blackwood's gaunt cheeks hollowing further, his obsidian eyes wide as sepulchral vaults, Lydia Thorne's violet orbs brimming with a soprano's terror, her shawl clutched like a talisman, Victor Langdon's grey gaze stormy with defiance, fists bold at his sides, yet the detective's finger wavered, retracting with the precision of a fencer's parry. "Not yet, mes amis. Precipitance is the fool's flourish. Evidence, she is the scalpel that carves veracity from obfuscation. Patience, a virtue, n'est-ce pas? Though in this nave of nefariousness, it strains even the saints." A collective exhalation rippled through the chamber, mingled relief and frustration, the thunder without punctuating the pause with a guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the cathedral's very foundations. Hastings cleared his throat, ever the anchor to Poirot's aerial arabesques. "Evidence, old man. We've caches and cufflinks aplenty. The crypt's contraband, the apothecary's arsenic. Lay it out plain. These folk afraid to fiddle strings." Poirot inclined his head, a fractional bow to his companion's pragmatism, rising with the fluid economy of a man whose every motion was choreographed by intellect's inexorable rhythm. He delved into his briefcase, a Gladstone of finest calfskin, its latches clicking like the tumblers of a combination lock, and withdrew the sheaf of wartime letters, now augmented by the crypt's unearthed satchel, sovereigns glinting dully in their linen folds, bonds crisp as autumn leaves, a provenance of pilferage from the chaos of Ypres. Behold, then, the organ's hidden compartment, that mechanical reliquary we first breached, held not epistles alone, but the engine of extortion, stolen by the younger Elias Blackwood in his desertion's delirium, supply crates, rifle, bluff, the sovereign's gleam, a mirror to his fiscal fall. Poirot's mustache arched in mild reproof, his cane tapping a staccato rebuttal on the flags. "Libel? No. The ledger libels you, Reverend. Pawn slips from Bath's back alleys, dated post-armistice. Bonds redeemed, guineas gambled on rouge et noir to drown the desertion's dirge. Hawthorne, the signal's sentinel, deciphered the map in your missives, demanded his moiety, a share in the silence he had long sold. The chalice? Your consecration's curse, arsenic absolved in the absolution's guise. Motive manifold, avarice armored in atonement, the embezzlement's endgame." The vicar subsided, crumpling into his chair like a bellows deflated, a groan escaping, as if exorcised, his hands veiling his face in a posture of profound prostration. Lydia, emboldened by the diversion,
or desperate for deflection, rose in a rustle of velvet, her soprano's timbre fracturing to a contralto of contrition. "And I, Mr. Poirot?" "The artifact's thief, yes. Ciborium and paten. Pawned for a passage to Prague's Philharmonics. Reginald knew, confronted me in the cloister's gloam. Return the relics, Lydia, or the choir's chorus turns to condemnation. But the glove, the bloody gauntlet in the loft, planted by my hand to implicate Mills, the meddlesome sergeant whose rounds nigh caught my filching. A red herring, flung in frenzy to flay the hounds from my trail. Mills spluttered, his ruddy jowls inflating like a pouter's, notebook slapping against his thigh. You? The glove mine own, crested with the force's finery. Dashed effrontery, miss, framing the law to feather your nest. Poirot nodded, the revelation a ripple in his mental reservoir. Effrontery, indeed, but explicable. Desperation's descant, mademoiselle. Your access unchallenged, the choristers linger a license to lurk. Yet the chalice's timing eludes you. Post-voluntary, the wine sipped in solitude. The ghost in white? Cleared. Victor scouting the loft for his sabotage's stage, sheet-draped to dodge.
Hawthorne the witness, your sire the victim, the chalice a cadet's chalice of retribution.
Victor's face blanched to putty, then flushed to fury, his frame quaking as if the thunder's tremor traversed his sinews. "Father, you unearth graves to graft guilt?" He perished a hero, cited in dispatches, not damned by some subaltern stutter. My rivalry was repertoire, not reprisal. The consul my crusade, not crusade's cross. Yet the pallor lingered, a pall of paternal phantom, motive twisted from melody to massacre's echo. Poirot paced then, the vestry's confines his proscenium, cane etching invisible runes on the stone as his exposition escalated to symphonic swell, voice rising in cadenced crescendos, the storm without a counterpoint chorus. Red herrings cleared, mes amis. The glove, Lydia's gambit. The ghost, Victor's guise. The cufflink, a counterfeit cuff, to collar the convenient. The notes script, Lydia's loops feigned. Yet Victor's vigor in the downstrokes. The map's margin, Blackwood's hand. Hasty as his flight from the fete's fiscal fiasco. Amelia's attack? Not widow's woe, but warning's whisper, the note slipped by a shadow from the fair child's fete, proximity permitting. But the chalice's crux, poisoned post-service, the acolyte's seal unbroken till the voluntary's verge. One who lingered, legitimate in the loft's latitude. Accusations flew then, a fusillade of frayed facades, Blackwood thundering of fraternal fidelity. Elias's exile my expiation, Hawthorne's avarice the asp, Lydia lamenting in lyric lament, love's loss my lash, but not life's lethal libation, Victor volleying with virtuosic vitriol, ambition's acid, aye, but arsenic? Absurdity. Even Mills muttered of miscarried justice, the glove's graft galls me, the air crackled, candles guttering in the gale's ingress, shadows leaping like litigants in a lawless melee, thunder crashing in corroborative chaos, a pandemonium presaging the penultimate pause. Poirot halted amid the maelstrom, his compact form a calm eye in the tempest, gloved hands uplifted in majesty. The absent Amelia's echo in the ether. His finger extended anew, deliberate as destiny's decree, tracing an arc that encompassed them all before settling, unerringly, inexorably, upon the vicar's quaking form. The detective's voice dropped to a sepulchral timbre, resonant with the finality of a fugue's resolution. "The killer is... you!" Chapter 10. The Unveiling. The vestry of St. Mary's Cathedral, that shadowed sanctum of whispered vespers and veiled vices, held its breath in the suspended hush that followed Hercule Poirot's proclamation, a moment stretched taut as the string of a bow drawn to its lethal arc. The year 1933, with its inexorable tolling toward the solstice's somber vigil, seemed to pause in obeisance to the drama unfolding within. The storm without had ebbed to a desultory drizzle, its patter on the cloister tiles a muted metronome underscoring the chamber's charged silence, while the candles, those flickering arbiters of illumination, guttered low, casting the suspects' faces in a palette of ochre and umber, hollows deepened to abyssal shades. Rain-streaked casements framed a night sky bruised to indigo, stars peeking through rent clouds like hesitant witnesses to the unmasking. Captain Hastings, his pipe now cold and clenched between teeth like a talisman against the uncanny, shifted his weight from brogue to brogue, the creak of leather a solitary counterpoint to the collective inhalation. Sergeant Mills, notebook forgotten in his lap, leaned forward with the rapt avidity of a man beholding the scaffold's drop, his ruddy features drained to the pallor of parchment. Lydia Thorne, her violet eyes wide as saucers of spilled ink, clutched her shawl till the fringes frayed, a soprano's gasp escaping in a tremulous whisper. "Reverend Elias? No, it cannot be." Victor Langdon, his stormy gray gaze fixed in incredulous fury, half rose from his pew, fists balled as if to launch a futile salvo against the inexorable. Poirot's finger, that unerring
Blackmail Monsieur Hawthorne wielded with the precision of a scalpel. He knew your brother's desertion, the flight from the Ypres wire, the barrage unchecked, the 12 souls swallowed by the Somme's insatiable maw. But deeper still, he knew your complicity, Reverend. You aided the escape, not mere fraternal feint, but active abetment. The false dispatch relayed through Hawthorne's signals, the dog tags swapped in the field's fever, the empty casket interred here to intern the infamy. Elias the Elder lived your atonement, while you, the gambler, the grasper, reaped the runaway's remnants. The crypt's cash, looted in the chaos, laundered through your ledgers to fund the faro tables of Bath and the fugitive's far-flung flight. Blackwood's hands, veined as the tracery of a rose window, and trembling now with the palsy of exposure, rose to clutch the cassock's collar, as if to strangle the confession burgeoning within. His face, that parchment mask of piety, crumpled in a rictus of ruin, lips blanching to the hue of communion wafer, forehead beading with sweat that gleamed like absolution's dew. Aided? Mon Dieu, Monsieur Poirot, you unearth sepulchres to sculpt scandals. Elias, my twin, my tormentor, he faltered, the mud devouring his metal. I whispered the retreat's route through the wire, forged the chaplain's report to veil the void. For love, for legacy, Reginald witnessed, his morse a mocking mirror to my mercy. He held the secret these 20 years, a sword suspended by sovereigns from the supply cache, bonds bartered, gold gambled to drown the dice's dirge in my debauched diversions. The accounts, they hemorrhaged. The fate's funds funneled to faro, the plate pawned in peril. He audited, unearthed the ulcer, demanded not restitution but ruin. Half the hoard, or the bishop's ear bent to the betrayal. Your orders are ordained by avarice, Elias, he intoned, his fugues a fanfare of felony. I repented, monsieur, vowed the vault's vacation, the tables for ecclesiastical kid, wiped the vessel to virginal vacancy. Motive? The fatal secret's foreclosure, Hawthorne's threat to trumpet the twin treacheries, your brother's bolt, your brother's ballast, in the bishopric's ear, unraveling your rectory, your reputation, your redemption. Blackwood's resistance ruptured then, a dam breached by the deluge of deduction.
He slumped forward, elbows braced on knees, face buried in hands that shook as if scourged by St. Paul's thorns. A sob erupted, raw, resonant. A rector's requiem stripped of rhetorical flourish, echoing off the vestry's vaults like a penitential psalm. He threatened, "Ruin absolute, monsieur." The hoard half-gleaned, yet his avarice insatiable. "The full cash, Elias, or the consistory convenes." I acted. In despair, the dice's devilry distilled to desperation. The arsenic, bitter as my betrayals, stirred into the sacramental stream during the dimming of the nave, the choir's chorus a cover for the crime. He sipped, convulsed, and the organ wailed his obsequies. "Forgive me. The little gray cells see too clearly." The confession cascaded, a cataract of culpability. The forged notes, Lydia's loops aped in masculine mimicry to misdirect the meddlesome. The cufflink pilfered from Victor's kit, sawn and secreted in the swell box to snare the ambitious acolyte. The glove, Mills's own, bloodied in haste from a pricked finger during the tampering, thrust into the loft to implicate the law's long arm. The attack on Amelia, a shadowed slip from the fair child's fete, her suspicions stirred by the widow's whispers of wartime whispers, silenced with a candlestick's cuff to her temple, the note, a facsimile of his own faint. The assembly absorbed the avalanche in stunned stasis. Lydia's sobs harmonized with the vicar's, a duet of devastation. Victor's defiance dissolved to dazed detachment, his gray eyes glazing as the frame's filigree unfurled. Mills muttered oaths under mustache, notebook scribbling the saga with stenographic fervor. Hastings, domino. The crypt's cash, sovereigns, shining as your fiscal fall's foundation. Amelia's assault, her suspicions silenced to safeguard the secret. No supernatural shade, no spectral score, merely mortal malice, methodical and mundane. Blackwood rose then, unbidden, his frame frail as a fasted friar, extending wrists as if for irons invisible. His voice a vestigial vestry whisper, "Take me, monsieur, the law's lash, the Lord's later judgment, the cathedral, she forgives not, but perhaps the crypt's communion with my twin will." Mills, with a nod to protocol, clapped irons on the vicar, cold steel singing against cassock cuff, escorting him into the night, where constables awaited in the drizzle's dim, the Lichgate's grill groaning a grim gâteau to jail. As the vestry emptied, the storm's remnants relenting to a starry vigil, Poirot and Hastings lingered amid the guttering candles, the air lightening as if exercised, the reliquary's myrrh mingling with the fresh breath of resolution. Amelia, roused from laudanum's lullaby by Hargrove's hand, was conveyed to the vicarage, her wheel waning, her whispers of wifely woe absolved in the unveiling. Lydia, liberated from larceny's lash, vowed restitution of the relics, her soprano's song to soar in contrition's key. Victor, vindicated from vendetta's veil, recommenced his recitals with renewed rigor, the console his uncontested kingdom. Dawn broke then, a hesitant herald over the Cotswold's crest, the sun's first rays gilding the cathedral's spire, piercing the nave's vaulted arches in shafts of aureate absolution, banishing the night's umbrage to the crypt's corners. The organ stirred anew, Victor at the keys, or perhaps Wilkins's acolyte, improvising a hymn of redemption, Bach's Jesu, joy of man's desiring, its melody weaving through the stone like threads of tapestry rewoven, the pipes swelling in serene supplication, a counterpoint to the village's awakening stir, the milkmaid's calls, the postman's bicycle bell, Eldridge exhaling the night's exorcism. Faint, ethereal grace lingered, a whisper that even in sacrilege's shadow
Redemption's refrain might yet resound.